often that somebody like myself gets an opportunity to interview and spend time with a living legend. Um, Today, I'm getting an opportunity to speak with Randy the Natural Couture. And as I'm going through my intro, I'm still trying to keep myself from geeking out a little bit because I have been a fan of this guy dating all the way back to the early stages of UFC. I mean, I was watching this back when Tank Abbott and all of these guys were, making a name for themselves. And so I'll have lots of questions for Randy about this. But we had a couple of laughs before the program started, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to revisit a few of those. As I started to explain to Randy, we have a mutual friend, and what was so funny was I got a call from that friend this morning who said, "Hey, if you really want to get Randy laughing out of the gate, bring up Rick Ashley." So, Randy, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the program. Again, for those of you that are just not aware as to how stellar this individual's career is, he was a world class collegiate wrestler at OSU. He is a six-time world champion, both in the light heavyweight and the heavyweight divisions. He is a UFC Hall of Famer. He is a Hollywood actor who just finished his fourth filming of The Expendables with Sylvester Stallone, who's probably one of my favorite actors of all time. So I can't wait to get into this conversation with you today, Randy. And again, thank you so much for being here on the program today.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on. I'll smack
Yeah.
Caleb. I'll smack Caleb when I see him next.
I'm telling you, it was so funny because Caleb started to call this morning. He goes, "All right, man. So how my hair looks now and everything." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I used to wear it, real high and tight, and Randy used to call me Rick Ashley." And I was like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, you got to just bring. He goes, "As a matter of fact, he actually sent me," and I'll let you say it because you actually started laughing because I had a Rick Ashley song playing when you
Yeah,
got onto the studio.
yeah. We were in Louisiana watching Caleb perform, and we thought he looked like Rick Astley when he was performing. That he should do an old '80s country version of a Rick Astley song. That would be really cool, and it's been a standing joke for years now. So anytime I hear a Rick Astley song, the first thing I think of is Caleb, and I usually end up sending him that song. I sent him a song yesterday, a Rick Astley song yesterday. So
Oh, that's awesome, man.
only
That's
fitting
hysterical.
that we're on the air here talking about him today. So it's very funny.
Absolutely. And Caleb, he's such a talented musician. Folks that don't know him, he's actually getting ready to open up for Randy Houser and some other really big names at a concert in Alabama that's coming up here in November. My wife Jill and I are really excited that we're going to get a chance to be there. Maybe you'll be there. Who knows? But he talks about all the times he goes riding with you on the four wheelers and spends time. And he just he says, Sean, a lot of people refer to Randy as Captain America, and the truth is, he really is. He's that good of a human being. So uh, that means a lot coming from Caleb to me.
Well, Caleb's a great kid. We were doing some charity motorcycle poker runs down in the Fort Benning area. We had a country band called American Young that was performing for us that day at the end of the ride. And they had recently been down to Fort Benning area for a songwriters conference, and they met Caleb there and they wrote a song together. And John and Christy O asked, "Hey, can we have this kid, come up and sing this song we wrote together at your deal?" And I was like, "Man, you guys are donating your time and your talent to this foundation. You can run around the stage naked if you want to. You're not going to hurt my feelings any. Call anybody up you want." So that was the first time I got to see Caleb perform. And get to meet him and get to know him a little bit, and we were off and running from there. He's got such an authentic voice in the country
He
space,
does.
and that's such a rarity nowadays, where everything's auto tuned to hell, and there are very few, I think, authentic country voices out there, and Caleb certainly possesses one. And it's such a tough industry. What is it going to take to get this kid noticed, to get him over the hump? Because he's got the work ethic. He's writing a bunch of his own music. He's performing every chance he gets, still holding down the day job, and supporting the family. So it's one of those classic stories, and he's just one of those kids you want to root for because he's that talented and just such a good guy and doing all the right things. So certainly
Yeah,
hoping.
he was out at the he was out at the winery this weekend, and he actually said, "Hey, Sean, what song do you want to hear?" And I said, "You know, I'm a huge Travis Tritt fan. He's a Georgia boy like me."
uh
And so he started playing a Travis Tritt song anymore, and he starts incorporating my name. Sean, I don't love you anymore. But you're right, his voice is just amazing, and he's coming on the podcast. We're doing a live stream this coming Saturday before he performs, and I can't wait to introduce him to so many more people. The hundreds of thousands of followers that I have on the podcast, and the millions of folks that have downloaded. So I can't wait. Hopefully somebody's going to recognize how talented he is and give him that shot that he deserves.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So, you started talking about charity and with all the incredible things that you have accomplished over your career, both from a collegiate standpoint, from a professional standpoint, I think the area that really touched me the most and why I was so much wanting to talk to you was the philanthropic work that you're doing. And you have created a charity, which is Extreme Couture GI Foundation. And that's really the first place that I want to start. So if you can talk a little bit about the foundation and how that came about and why it was so important for you to get involved with the men and women of uniform.
Well, I wore that uniform. I took that oath at 19 years old. A lot of people don't realize that I served in the United States Army for 6 years, from 1982 to 1988. It was the peak of the Cold War. I'm a Cold War veteran. There wasn't much
Yes,
going
sir.
on, frankly, back then. And I think that time after taking that oath and those 6 years that I spent were a very formative time for me and an important time in my life, and in many ways got me on track and set me up for the success that I would later find through the sport of wrestling and fighting. So fortunate that the Army was able to help me the way they did, and still some of my best friends to this day are guys that I met during that time of my life. And now, at this stage of my life, I get a chance to give back to many of those men and women that took that same oath I took. And since 9/11 have had to put their butts on the line, actually go into the theater of combat, do a lot of the things that I trained to do and never had to do. And many of them come back messed up, both internally and externally. And in '06, I got to go to Iraq. I spent 12 days on the ground in the battlefield, meeting a bunch of those soldiers. Pretty stark for me as someone who took that oath to see men and women doing the things I trained to do and never had to do. In '07, I got to go to Walter Reed in Bethesda in Washington, D.C. We did a barbecue for the Fisher House. That's where I met a bunch of caregivers. That's a mom, a dad, a wife that's been living there in the Fisher House while their loved one is going through surgeries in that hospital, learning to walk again, getting fitted for prosthetics, and getting squared away. Um, it was there walking the wards that I met a lot of guys and gals fresh off the battlefield, going through that process, and heard the horror stories, the financial woes. No, my mom's car's been in the parking garage for the last 3 months. It's got a boot on it. We can't afford to pay the $1,500 in tickets to get the boot back so she can drive her car back home and keep her job. I mean, it was literally that ridiculous. And so that was the impetus for me to go out and file for 501c3 status and create the Extreme Couture GI Foundation to try and
Yeah.
raise awareness and put some funds into the hands of some of these men and women that are making that transition, that have been wounded in combat. It was disgusting, honestly, to me to hear those stories and to see how many of them are falling through the cracks. We already know the suicide statistics and all the other stuff that's going on with the VA. It's a travesty, honestly. There's 55,000 homeless veterans on the streets in this country, and they're pouring across the southern border like it's not like there's no tomorrow. It's ridiculous to me. So we're just trying to do our part. We're a small foundation. It's my gym staff, friends, like Caleb, who step up and
Yep.
donate their time. Um, you know, Mark Pastelnik up in Quad Cities, David Mancuso down in Florida, Patrick Crosby up in the Pacific Northwest. These guys stepped up and for no cost, literally volunteer their time and energy to help me put together a bunch of these events. My gym staff already works for me in Vegas. That's where we started. So we're a 100% give back organization. We don't have any overhead. Whatever our events cost us is our only expense. Nobody gets paid out of this foundation, and every dime we raise goes into the hands of a soldier and his family.
That's awesome. Like you, I was over in Germany as well for a period of time. I was at the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center,
Okay.
and I can speak from experience of seeing the C-130s coming in, the choppers that were coming in, bringing in these young men and women that were over in the theater who were unfortunate victims of an IED. Now with traumatic brain injuries, with physical injuries, but to the point that you said, which is so profound, so many of these men and women have the non-visible scars. They carry the scars of war. They carry the scars of the mental affliction of being in the theater, of being in a bombing situation, or falling under attack. My son-in-law just came out of the army after being with the Night Stalkers. He was in the 160th
Yeah,
out of
task force. Yeah, out of Fort Campbell.
yeah. Yep. Well, he was in Savannah, and but he was at Fort Campbell as well, and we're just outside of Fort Moore, where I am. So
Mhm.
one of the things that I'm extremely excited about and very proud of is that um, our companies are partnering now, and we've been working with Val, who's fantastic, from your team, to become part of your foundation. And I know Caleb and myself and a few other country artists are working on something for the spring that we're going to donate all of the proceeds from the gate directly to the Extreme Couture GI Foundation. So we're really excited about that and looking forward to being a partner with you guys going forward.
Oh man, that's really cool. That's news to me. I knew Caleb was brewing something, and that's part and parcel how we got connected, Sean, to be on this podcast. But he hasn't really told me exactly what he's got planned. I'm excited. Obviously, he was doing some events down in the Fort Benning area for a while, and the wheels came off that wagon. So it would be great to get back in the state of Georgia where there's such a military presence and so much going on down there. So that's exciting. That's really
Absolutely.
exciting. We've expanded our mission a little bit in a couple of ways. I've also, about 6 years ago, started the MVP, Merging Vets and Players. The Nevada chapter runs out of my gym, and that's expanded our database for soldiers in our community in Las Vegas. And so we created a portal on our website, the Extreme Couture GI Foundation, xcgif.org, for any soldier out there that's struggling with their bills and needs to get some of those offered back. You show me those bills, fill out the paperwork in the portal, provide me those bills. We'll pay those bills off and get those bills offered back. So you're not buried in that. And that's one less stress and stressor in your life that you have to worry about. The other thing that we're doing is, like you said, we recognize that some of our soldiers, the outside external wounds are easy to see. Some of the internal wounds are not so easy to deal with. And we already all know the stats, 22 a day, which I
That's
think
right.
is probably a light number. So we're providing 10 block sessions of counseling now with a professional counselor to some of those folks that need some extra help, some professional help. The peer-on-peer counseling that MVP provides, that's soldier to soldier, it is great, but some of the guys need a little more professional help. And so we're helping some of those guys get in line with this counselor that we found is pretty remarkable in helping some of these guys deal with their issues and find ways to expose those demons to the light of day. They don't like to be brought out into the light of day and discussed and figured out. That's what's the beauty of MVP. As much as those guys getting on the mat and sweating together is important, sitting on that mat after those workouts and letting those demons out, talking about everything they're struggling with and everything that's going good in their lives. It's a very powerful place. And so we're excited to be involved in both of those. I think we're in 8 cities now across the country and continuing to grow the MVP mission on a national basis as well. So again, the more of us that link arms from these small foundations and help each other out, get the word out there, the less and fewer of our men and women fall through the cracks.
Amen. And again, I take my hat off to you and all of the incredible volunteers of your foundation. I know people like my son-in-law, who I'm going to really, sit down and have a good conversation with because, he's one of those, that came out of the special forces and,
Mm.
the scars aren't visible, but, he's very honest and, he'll tell you, I'm doing what I can and, I have my struggles and I have my days. And I think, finding a program like what you and your team are offering is just so invaluable to these men and women who have laid everything on the line to defend the things that a lot of folks take for granted each and every single day. So, really exciting. But I want to kind of move to another topic because to me this one was just absolutely kind of hysterical. Um, Chael Sonnen, who I absolutely love. Bad Boy Inc. And he just always finds a way to get under Tito Ortiz's skin and Vanderlei Silver and, all these guys. And, you can't help but to laugh because he's just so funny. But, you had an extremely serious health condition a few years back. And, Jay Glazer tells the story, about how, he came to the hospital and he was visiting with you, and the nurses are like, okay, Mr. Couture, what's your pain level? And you're like, it's a 2. And they're like, okay, but before this happened, what was your pain level? And you're like, I was maybe a 4. And Jay Glazer's like, don't ask him those questions. You ask me. He doesn't understand what the meaning of pain is.
Yeah.
And, so what happened? Because there were all kinds of things going around, but I know that you actually suffered a major heart attack.
Yeah, it was a weird day for sure. And, things being what they are, I'm glad things happened when and where they happened. I was up at Unbreakable at Jay's Gym, up in West Sunset. I'm in the middle of shooting a Western, Outlaw Johnny Black with Michael Jai White. I'd worked the day before. I had Tuesday off. So I went to the gym and got a circuit in, I'd done that circuit 2 days before that and had no issues. And it was weird because I felt like crap. I was sweating. I had this ache that I thought I'd popped a rib on the right side of my body, this ache that just wrapped around my chest. So I had a foam roller. I'm trying to roll it out, hoping my back will pop and alleviate this pressure. And nothing happened. It didn't work. I drank
You're the
it.
first person I've ever heard say I'm foam rolling out a heart attack.
Well, I didn't realize that was what was going on for sure. But I drank an after workout drink and immediately threw it back up. And
Oh,
I'm not a puker. I've never been a puker. So that was definitely a big red flag for me. I knew something wasn't quite right and drove home, changed clothes, drove home. Literally drove right past Cedar Sinai in the car to go to the condo. Got to the condo and said, "Hey, I'm going to lay down. This ache just won't go away." And laid around for about 10 minutes. I'm like, man, something is not right. So let's walk over to Cedar Sinai to the
let's
emergency
walk.
room and see what's going on. So I walked in there and it was packed. The emergency room was literally packed with people. They sat me down for about 10 minutes, finally got me on an EKG, and you'd have thought it was NASCAR. The clothes were getting cut off. The gurney, I mean, it was a race, honestly, up to the third floor to the cath lab. And my girlfriend Mindy's eyes were about that big. She thought they were cracking my chest open. It was crazy.
And they put a stent in.
They found a clot in my diagonal artery, probably from a plaque rupture and being dehydrated in the workout. They sucked the clot out, put a stent in, and I spent 2 nights in the cardiac ICU. How anybody sleeps in that place, I have no idea.
Yeah.
The
With bells
beeping,
ringing all night
somebody had
long.
their dog
But
up
you
there. I mean, it was insane. It was just a menagerie of noise and intensity up there. It was crazy, but we survived
but to
that.
hear Chael Sonnen tell it, Chael's like, "Man, I texted Randy and Randy texted me back and he's like, it's just this little thing going on. I'm going home tomorrow." And, meanwhile, Big John's running around trying to get information from your significant other. And they're like, yeah, it's pretty serious. And here's Randy. Yeah, I'm going home tomorrow. I'm fine. I was foam rolling it out, man. It's all good.
Yeah, they're like, "Hey, we're going to get you an ambulance and a wheelchair." I said, "I walk my happy ass in here. I'm walking my happy ass home."
Unbelievable. Well, let me go back to uh, a couple of you got your start. I think it was in 1997 in the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
That's right.
And yeah, and that's back, during, the true trailblazers, right? The Ken Shamrocks, the Frank Shamrocks, the
Yeah. Yeah.
Don Fries, the Tank Abbotts. You know,
Yep.
what what have you seen? I mean, we've all seen the transition, right? From when
Mhm.
John McCain came on TV and talked about what a brutal sport it was, and but what have you seen, and what do you believe your role has been in transforming the UFC into, dare I say, and mixed martial arts in general, into the largest spectator sport probably on the earth at this point?
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of the fastest growing sports on the planet right now, and has been growing significantly, I would say, since '05. The first season of The Ultimate Fighter, I think, changed the landscape and a lot of the misconceptions that people had about our sport. And kudos to Zuffa and Dana White for having the wherewithal and the cash, let's be honest, to put that on TV. They had to buy that spot with Spike TV, although Spike was the only one that had the balls to put us on. They still had to pay for the
Right.
time, and that was quite expensive. So, in many ways, that changed the landscape for the sport for everybody, and created the opportunity for Bellator and PFL and all these other organizations as the sport flourished and kind of took root in that year. And those misconceptions about who we were, everybody thought we were criminals, that somehow we were a bunch of thugs and criminals,
Yeah.
and nothing could be further from the truth. Most of us are college educated guys that have trained in one form of martial art or combative sport or another, and this is our opportunity to be a professional athlete in this society, which is a pretty big deal in my opinion. So
Yeah.
uh, I was kind of came in on the cusp of that second generation of athletes. The first generation of athletes in MMA, or no holds barred, as they called it, was out to prove that their style, whatever martial art background they came from, was the best. And I think we quickly realized there was no one martial art style that encompassed everything you needed to know. I came in on the cusp of that changing of mentality, basically, and I recognized immediately that my wrestling was a great place to start, but I needed to learn a lot of other stuff. And so this second generation started cross training, started learning the jujitsu, learning the kickboxing, learning all the other striking styles and concepts, implementing the different styles of wrestling and stuff into our fight games, and becoming a well-rounded mixed martial artist. It wasn't so much about proving that wrestling or BJJ or whatever my style was the best. It was about being a well-rounded fighter and trying to be the best in the world. And then there was a whole bunch of fighters, young kids that saw us. And so that's what I want to do. And that's this third generation of fighters that we're seeing now, that were teenagers when we were doing this, and said, that's what I want to do. They don't care about a belt. They don't care about any of those other specific backgrounds other than being a mixed martial artist. So we're enjoying the fruits of that. And there's a lot of
Yep.
amazing fighters, a lot of amazing promotions. And this sport has taken root as the combative sport for this generation, for sure. Where I think it used to be boxing. I think a lot of people are disenchanted with boxing, with the disparaging decisions and the
Absolutely.
kind of the pity patting around. And if you look at the golden era of boxing, which was that Ali era, Duran, Hagler, Hearns. I mean, those guys went out there to try and rip
Leonard.
each other's heads off. Exactly. There was no
Yep.
pity patting around trying to win rounds. They were trying to kill each other, and I
Yeah.
think that's
Those were the
why it
greatest
was so
fights, right?
exciting. Exactly. And it's become
Yeah.
all about keeping that O and not losing a fight instead of going out there and laying it on the line. And I think people recognize that. And what do they see in MMA? Every fight from the undercard all the way through the main event is a scrap, and they're out there to show what they're all about and put it all on the line. So I think we have, aside from the growing pains we're exposing with guys like Jake Paul and others poking Dana about fighter pay and all of that. I think that's the area where we need to grow the most. Uh, is taking care of our fighters, making sure these fighters are getting their fair share of the revenue that comes in from these events. And I think that's a huge issue in our sport right now, but we'll get there. I think we'll get there.
And you've been very vocal about this, right? Because I mean, almost to the point of talking about unionizing to a degree to ensure
Yeah.
that there's proper health care for these guys
Yeah.
and ladies, to make sure that, after their careers are over, that they're not just tossed to the wayside, and that they have some levels of protection. And then again, the fair compensation. I've heard Dana White's position on these things. Take a look at what some of these guys are being made, right? Like the Conor McGregors, but not everybody's a Conor McGregor. Not everybody's a Randy Couture. Not everybody's a Brock Lesnar. And I
Yeah.
think especially now with the merger between the WWF and and Zuffa, the UFC, I mean, it's going to be some interesting conversations, and I know you've been very vocal about that.
Well, I stood up for myself when they bought the company back in 2001. They were asking me to sign a 17-page piece of crap contract that would give away all my ancillary rights in just about every category. And I fought for those. And I got crickets from all the other fighters. Nobody got behind me in that movement to point out and shine a light on these ridiculous contracts and the disparaging nature of them, the exclusive nature of them. Now, obviously, with Jake Paul and these these crossover boxing matches where you got Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, and some of these other guys, Nate Diaz now, making more money from that one boxing match than they've ever made in mixed martial arts, which is a travesty. Show me another sport in our society where the professional athletes that fight or compete in those events make 13 to 15% of the money that comes in from those events. That's ridiculous. That's what's going to the fighters on any one of these given cards. Now, I will say I'm involved with the Professional Fighters League as a commentator, and they're doing a better job. They're paying these fighters well along the way, and at the end of the rainbow, if they win that title, they're doing a better job of treating the fighters better, giving them a voice in the regulation, a lot of things that aren't happening in the sport in other places. So I'm excited to be part of that organization, to see them continue to grow and take care of the fighters and do a better job and set the bar in many ways, I think, in how the fighters are paid and how they're treated. I think the other promotions need to pay attention, because I think that there's a lot going on there, and that's the area where we as athletes and fighters in this sport need to come together. We're the commodity. Without the fighters, there is no fight. So if we unify
Great
and
point.
hold these promoters' feet to the fire for minimum standards for 401k and health insurance and things that a lot of other professional athletes in our society enjoy, we'll be doing a lot better off, and we'll get our fair share of the slice of that pie from the revenue that comes in from each and every one of those events. The Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association is something I've been involved with. That's what took me to Congress and speaking at Congress about the issues in our sport. Unfortunately, Dana White has a strong relationship with President Trump. There was no way we were going to get that through Congress and the Senate. Politics are politics. They're everywhere, unfortunately. That's the truth of the matter. And even now with the current administration, it's going to be very, very difficult. The UFC has very strong lobbyists that working for them. They've spent millions and millions of dollars keeping this from getting to a vote and getting the Muhammad Ali Act amended to protect combative sports athletes in general, not just boxers.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting, growing up, because we're pretty close in age, and thinking about the era of the Bob Arums and the Don Kings and the
Mhm.
promoters and how they took advantage of incredible people like Mike Tyson as a prime example, and unless
Yeah.
you really spent time,
Well,
learning about
here's a
Mike
little
Tyson.
tidbit. Here's a little tidbit that
Yeah,
most people don't know. So the company that bought the UFC brand in 2001 was called Zuffa. The two guys that ran that company were the Fertitas, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta. Dana White was their cardio kickboxing instructor. They were friends from high school. Now, those guys had the money. Dana was the one who was representing Chuck and Tito in those early days. He had to hand them off to a lawyer because it was a conflict of interest when they bought the company and made Dana the president. Now, the Muhammad Ali Act was passed in 1996 to protect boxers from promoters like Don King and Bob Arum, like you mentioned. Who was the athletic director for the Nevada State Athletic Commission when that act was passed in 1996? You have any idea? Lorenzo Fertitta.
Fertitta.
He was running the athletic commission when the Muhammad Ali Act was passed. So when he was looking at the sport of mixed martial arts, he knew exactly what he was looking at and how he could exploit those athletes that he had in his stable of fighters. And they have over 600 fighters signed to contracts with the UFC. He knew exactly what he was doing and exactly and their goal was to keep fighter pay under 20%, which they've done very, very well. In fact,
Yeah.
it stays right around 13 to 15% from uh, any given fight or show that the fighters fight on.
Well,
So
hopefully, as more and more, fighters start to listen to the OGs like yourself, who back in the early days, dating back to what, 2005, when you were smart enough to hold on to your ancillary rights, to be able to control your own destiny, to be able to control your brand. Hopefully, more and more of these third generation fighters are going to pay attention to what you're doing. You brought up the Professional Fighters League, and I know they have a big card coming up in November,
mhm.
if I'm not mistaken. It's really interesting to see how Jake Paul has really come along, and he's sort of a juggernaut, right? He's
Yeah.
really created a lot of chaos and a lot of noise in the world of not only boxing but mixed martial arts. And with Francis Ngannou, stepping away from the UFC,
Yeah.
over contract disputes, it's opening the door for some of these superstars to really seek out these other leagues like the PFL, where you're a commentator, as you said. What do you think do you think an organization like the PFL will rise to the level of a USC to be able to, give them that challenge? Or do you think that the UFC will look to try to diminish those and maybe acquire them? I mean, what do you see as the future?
Well, I definitely think we're on the UFC's radar now. I don't. I think for the first few years, and this is our sixth year as an organization. We were originally the World Series of Fighting. We were bought out. Don Davis and Pete Murray bought out that brand and spent a year rebranding it to become the Professional Fighters League. Um, Jake Paul considers himself a disruptor in boxing. Obviously, he's an influencer. He's got a lot of followers on social media platforms, and he's using that to make himself a lot of money. And he's backing it up so far in boxing. He's been backing it up. He's been very selective in the guys that he's picked to fight.
Yes.
But he's backed it up, and now he wants to move into MMA and try and be a disruptor in MMA. I'm not much for the rhetoric, frankly. It was never my style. But if it takes a guy like Jake Paul to shine a light and poke Dana White in the chest about the fighter pay and the disparaging difference between boxing and MMA, then I'll get behind a guy like Jake Paul all day, every day. Um,
Yeah.
Now, as he forays and tries to be a disruptor in MMA, and he's trying to do that with the PFL, it will be interesting because he's going to have to step up and walk out into that cage and fight whoever they want him to fight. He's not going to be able to select grapplers and wrestlers to box against. He's going to have to pick real opponents. Not that those guys weren't real opponents, but let's be honest, they weren't strikers. They weren't pure
Well,
boxers.
that's right.
They were more grapplers than anything. So, yes,
Yeah, they
there's
had ground
established
game, and
great
that's
names
a big
and
difference.
great names in MMA, and their striking was certainly adequate for mixed martial arts, but that's different than professional boxing. It's apples and oranges in many, many ways. So, as long as Jake Paul steps up in that cage and backs it up against whoever they want to throw him in there, I'll continue to support him. But preferential treatment and thinking you're going to get an easy ride, that's not going to happen in mixed martial arts. So
Well, it's going to
that's
be
just how I
interesting.
see it. I think it's going to be interesting too. And I think, I would love to see him fight Nate Diaz in mixed martial arts. And I think if Nate works on his transition skills, his takedown abilities, and can find a way to use that wrestling and put Jake Paul on his back, Jake Paul's probably going to have a big, big problem. And if Jake Paul shines and sharpens the other side of that coin, which is his sprawl and his ability to scramble and stays off of his back and off of the ground, now we're looking at a boxing rematch with Nate Diaz with small gloves. That favors him in that situation. So I think that would be an interesting matchup. I mean, give Tyron Woodley a crack in MMA to get one back against Jake. I
Yep.
think those are great matchups. I would pay and hopefully be sitting ringside to watch those fights, and that will be interesting to see
Listen,
how they
I
end
would
up.
love to see. I would love to see a Diaz Paul fight. Diaz has always been a scrapper. He's always been, I
Yep.
think, somebody who hasn't gotten the level of respect that he should, because the guy was a warrior. Every time he got into that ring, I mean, he laid it all on the line. He didn't walk out of there, win, lose, or draw, at any point that I watched him fight, where he shouldn't have held his head high. I mean, the guy was he was a fighter. But I
Yeah,
wanted to ask you a couple of questions.
Warrior
Yeah.
Spirit, and both those Diaz boys is very, very strong, and they're fun to watch compete. Their attitude is awesome, and they get after it for sure.
Yeah. So a few last questions that I have for you. So during your career, you had the opportunity to fight Tito Ortiz, and I think you actually took his belt from him in 2003, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
You had several fights with Chuck Liddell.
Hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, there was a trilogy, right? There were
Right?
3 fights with Liddell. You fought probably one of the most enormous human beings to walk the face of the earth in Brock Lesnar.
Yeah.
So, of all these fights that you've had, which one is the most memorable for you? Whether it was winning a belt or just one of these fights that you just said, "Man, I laid it all on the line."
Yeah, there's several of those. Honestly, there are a couple certainly that set the tone and the nature of my entire career. Certainly, one of my favorites is the Tim Sylvia fight. I'd been retired for about 13 months. Was going through a divorce and just kind of not feeling like myself. That was right after the third Chuck fight and losing that fight. Took a break. Needed to kind of let the dust settle and get through that. But the dust finally settled. I stepped on the mat to compete in the professional submission league match against Jacare de Souza. And it was an amazing match. I had a blast at the event. It was like a dual meet, USA versus Russia kind of dual meet format. It was a lot of fun. And that's when I knew, I think, that my competitive spirit was back where it should be. And I wanted to compete some more. I was fortunate enough to then, through one thing led to another, get to fight Tim Sylvia for the heavyweight championship in Ohio. That was the biggest crowd we'd ever had at an MMA event at that point, about 21,000 people. And it was crazy. I had practiced that opening combination, left inside kick, overhand right, left hook. I hit him with that overhand right and he fell down. I think
And
I
he
was
fell
as
down.
surprised as everybody. So the entire arena jumped to their feet and I don't think they sat back down for the rest of the fight. That last 10-second countdown was remarkable. I'll never forget that. And Tim is a good friend, somebody I respect, and to this day we're still friends. We were friends when that happened. I knew he was going to have some issues generating the animosity that he needs to psychologically go out and do his job because we were friends. And at the end of the day, I'm glad it went the way it went. That was probably the closest I'd ever come to that one punch knockout. And I think most people at 44 years old thought I was crazy for coming back in the first place. So I'm glad it went all 5 rounds and went the way it went.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was a crazy fight. I remember watching that fight. I've been a student of the game for a lot of years. I've been a fan even longer, but the Brock Lesnar fight was a crazy fight. He was a
yeah,
disruptor coming from the World Wrestling
yeah.
Federation
That's why they really
into
liked him
UFC.
because he brought all those eyeballs from the WWE over to the UFC, and those were some of the biggest pay-per-views that the company had ever had. I felt like I had him going. I think if he hadn't grabbed the fence in the first round and that first takedown, it might have been a different night. I hit him and cut him over his right eye, and I could
Yep.
see the kind of the almost terror because he just hadn't really made friends with the fact that he was going to get punched in the face, and we saw that on several other occasions against Overeem and certainly Velasquez when he got cracked. It was a game changer. So but things are what they are.
As they say, everybody has a plan until the first time they get
Yeah,
smacked in the mouth, right?
and he's a giant athlete. I mean, very few guys that walk around at 290 pounds that move the way that moves. He's an amazing human for sure.
You're a
Sometimes you
brave
question how
man to
much
get into
human
the ring with
DNA
that
is
guy.
there, but he is a huge guy for sure.
Yeah. So, but, you know, the who is your least favorite person to deal with from a fighter? I know who it is in UFC, but who is
Well,
it
I don't
from
know.
a
I
fighter
mean, I never
standpoint?
really had an issue with Dana White. Dana White has
No, I know
really
you
from day
didn't. I know
one
you
had an
didn't.
issue with me, and that's on him. He's pretty predictable, and I think everybody knows Dana very, very well. And I think in many ways the Fertitas used Dana as a stick. I mean, they knew how to swing him and keep people off guard and what he was good at. And so I don't have any animosity towards Dana. I'm a little irritated with how he treated my son when he had the opportunity to have my son fight for him, but my son went on from that experience and had an amazing career with Bellator and Scott Coker, and it's one of the reasons why I think Scott Coker is such an amazing guy, because he's one of those
And
handshake guys.
you've always been very yeah, and you've always been very honest about the fact that you don't have any animosity towards Dana White. You've never had a problem with Dana. It's really from out of the gate because of your wisdom of holding on to your ancillaries that kind of drove the stake in that relationship where, they were hoping that you were going to just, roll over and take it. But who is your least favorite person to have to fight in UFC?
As a fighter, you're never going to allow that to enter your mind. I mean, the last thing you want to be is angry or carry any animosity into that cage. You need to have a clear head and a focused game plan if you have any thought that you're going to be successful. A mad athlete is a reckless athlete, and you're going to make mistakes and put yourself. So it didn't matter how much smack Tito talked, and when you sign to fight Tito, that's what's going to happen. Or Josh Barnett, or any of those guys that like to talk some smack and use that as a way to get under your skin and distract you from what you need to be thinking about to go out there and win that fight. So as an athlete, you can't allow that stuff to get into your psyche and to affect you. You have to keep it clean and stay laser focused on what you need to do to go out there and solve the problem that each and every one of those guys poses.
Awesome. Last question that I have for you. You've now gone through 4 movies, pretty expendable. And I got to tell you, you know what the movies are going to be about, right? After the very first one, I was so jacked up when I saw it's Sylvester Stallone and Jason Statham. And I'm going to ask you a question about Jason Statham. So get ready for that one. That's going to be my final question.
Okay.
Chuck Norris, Arnold Schwarzenegger, all of these, these larger than life people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think of Sylvester Stallone, automatically the brain goes to Rocky. It goes to Rambo, right? All of these, these cult classics. Coming from the world of fighting and being cast into an all-star cast of characters, and you had a pretty significant role in all of the first 3 Expendables that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you, getting an opportunity to work with people like Sylvester Stallone, and who, by the way, is probably one of my favorite human beings walking on the face of the earth, and I hope one day I get a chance to meet him. But what was it like for you being cast amongst those giants?
Well, it was a huge honor. It's definitely a pinch me moment, I think, for all of us. I remember in Expendables 1, we shot the first part of that movie down in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil for a couple of weeks. And we're standing around this well outside of this palace that we're going to infiltrate. And we're all synchronizing our watches in the scene. And I think all of us actors and all of the cast were buzzing with this whole ensemble cast of people coming together like that. I think it was just remarkable. It was definitely one of those moments I was like, am I really here? Is this really happening? But a great group of guys.
It's kind of like my moment with you today, man.
and the cast just keeps changing and morphing and expanding and contracting in some ways, but it's been an amazing thing to be a part of. And as an aspiring actor, what better people to be hanging around and watching and studying and seeing how they've made a profession out of this for over 30 years. And there's a disparaging difference there. If you look at guys like Mickey Rourke and Van Damme, who were in the first 2 films, versus Bruce Willis, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Statham, certainly those first 3 names who have been staples in the action genre films for over 30 years with very little wavering up and downs, where Van Damme and Mickey have had these huge up and downs in their career. And what's the difference? Well, watch the way those guys treat this and how professional they are and what they do and how they act on set and all of that. And it becomes very, very apparent why they've been so steady for so long. So I couldn't be in a better place to learn this industry. Sit in Video Village, watch how Sylvester Stallone operates, both as a director, a writer and an actor, and he's been in all three of those. Wore all three of those hats in this property. So it's been really, really fun, entertaining, and enlightening. I've learned a lot being around these guys and watching them operate.
Yeah, people just don't realize how incredibly talented and smart Sylvester Stallone is, from the writing of all of the Rocky movies, the Rambo movies, to
Expendables
the
one.
th that's right. That's right. So my
He's an
final
amazing
question
writer.
for
He
you.
really is. He's a fantastic
He's
writer.
brilliant. And
Obviously, the
watching
Tulsa
him in The
King has
King of
been out.
Tulsa.
Yeah, the Tulsa King has been out, and a lot of people saying it's his best work as an actor. I think he was involved in writing that as well, and it's brilliant. Just the dichotomy of this gangster that's been in prison for over 25 years now, coming out into this world right now. I
That's
mean,
right.
it's classic stuff. It doesn't get any better than that.
N You're right, and it is hands down his most brilliant role, there's no doubt about it. You just see a side of Stallone in this that you don't get a chance to see in the other movies, and I think that's in in part due to Taylor Sheridan and what he's able to bring out of people, and how talented a writer and storyteller, he is in his own way. He just brought out, the best from a collaborative standpoint with Sylvester Stallone. So my final question for you, and I told you it was going to be a Jason Statham question. If the two of you were to step into the ring, who's getting their hand raised?
Well, I think Jason will be the first one to tell you that he's not a fighter. We're certainly nowhere near the same weight class, but Jason's an amazing guy. Obviously, he was a world class diver, Commonwealth Games champion in high diving. Olympic caliber athlete in diving. And I think he's rallied that athletic ability into what he's become as one of the hottest action stars in the industry, and has been for quite some time. But he's a great guy. He's a fun guy to hang out with. And be on set with. He's gregarious. He's outgoing. He tells great stories and great jokes. He's just a super nice guy. And I found the entire cast with regard to Expendables that way. And I was kind of hoping in 4 we'd get Wesley Snipes back, or we'd get Antonio Banderas back, because they were both so much fun to work with in 3. And I thought they were great additions to the cast. And then obviously they went a different direction with 4. Added some new cast members. There's only 4 originals left in 4. It just hit the theaters about a week and a half ago, and is doing very, very well. But Statham, Stallone, Lundgren, and myself are the only 4 original Expendables left in that one. Obviously, we added
And that
50
says a
Cent.
lot about you.
Well, I was honored that they kept me in the first one. I mean, he brought me in to talk about that project, and he was originally had written Hail Caesar for Wesley Snipes, and Wesley was having some issues then, so he was going to adapt that role, Hail Caesar, to fit me as a college educated guy that rants about his ear and quotes Nietzsche, and this was the conversation we'd had. And then a week later, he ends up getting Terry Crews to play Hail Caesar, who was a perfect fit for that role. And I was honored that he went back and wrote into the script to keep me in the movie. He could have just went his own way, let me go. But I think he's such a huge fight fan, and I think admired me for my fight career and the integrity I brought to the sport. And I think that was what got me in and kept me in that movie, and has allowed me to be in all 4 of these.
Well, that says a lot about his character and his loyalty to the people who, he feels are loyal to him and who are his friend. And,
He's a
you
great
know,
guy. He's a very smart guy. I think everybody thinks because you know Adrian that somehow and he is as good at coming up with these one-liners as anybody I've ever seen. He is very, very smart.
I bet. Well, Randy, I know you're traveling. I want to be mindful of your time. I'm going to be out in Vegas in October, the 19th and 20th. I hope I get a chance to swing by your gym and at least get a chance to check it out. I don't know where you're going to be in the world, but if you're there, I'd love a chance to say hello and uh, see how things go. But it's been such an honor to have you on the program today and for being so gracious with your time.
Well, thanks, Sean. I appreciate you having me on. I look forward to seeing you in October. I think we should be around that time frame, we'll be getting ready to go to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to watch Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou hook it up in a boxing match. So that's
That's
going to
going
be
to
a
be
fun trip.
insane.
Yeah.
That's going to be insane. All right, everybody. I want to say thank you all so much for hanging out with myself and my extremely special guest, Randy the Natural Couture, as we got an opportunity to explore a whole bunch of different areas that I've had questions for so long, that Randy was so generous and willing to engage in this dialogue. So, again, thanks to Randy Couture. Thanks to each and every single one of you who tunes in, logs on, and hangs out with me. We'll be back again next week with another fantastic interview. I can't wait. Until then, be good to yourself, but more importantly, y'all be good to each other. Take care.